Hey everyone, this is Nitro. In this video, I just wanted to talk about how the buffs and debuffs in this game work, because it seems like a lot of people are confused about and specifically, when they stack and when they don't stack and so on. So it's actually, when you break it down, it's quite simple, but you do have to break it down. So let's just begin. So the first thing to note is every single kind of buff or debuff can only be applied once. What I mean is, if you have, let's say, a plus percentage attack buff, you can only have one of those. So, for example, Chivalry, the Chivalry buff gives Leon plus 30% attack, okay? So, this 30% attack thing does not stack with, let's say, the faction buff, which gives plus 20% attack. You're going to have only one of those. And the game will take the one that is of a higher value. So if you have, if Leon already has the faction buff for 4 turns and then you use Chivalry, that faction buff is removed and replaced by the Chivalry buff that only lasts 2 turns. So you can basically eliminate your own buffs this way, which can be a challenge. So other things that, for example, other things that don't stack would be, let's say, Bernhard. His faction buff gives also plus 20% defense, right? If you have, let's say, Sophia in your party, her talent gives, let's say, plus 17% defense. So any character with a faction buff will not benefit from her talent's defense increase. Now, they'll get the other buff, which is received heal effect plus 20%. They just won't get the defense increase value. So similarly, let's bring up Liana as an example. There's a lot of buffs on characters who increase defense, like Mass Protect as an example. Mass Protect, it gives an increase of defense by 20%. This buff, again, will not stack with the faction buff. So if you use Mass Protect on characters with faction buffs, they won't get this defense increase. They will, however, get the immunity to defense and magic defense reduction and healing negation debuffs. So even though Mass Protect won't give a defense increase, it still has utility for the immunity to heal negation debuffs. So actually, Mass Protect is surprisingly useful for PvP because there's characters like Egbert who can, render people unable to heal. But Liana's Mass Protect would prevent that from occurring. So other than that, other than the percentages though, there's other values that add, let's say, plus 15% damage taken, plus 15% damage dealt. That does stack with plus 20% attack. Also, it's important to note that Tieris's buffs are both unique as well. So her Miracle buff is 15% damage taken is increased and 15% damage reduction. So this buff does stack with faction buffs and so on. Similarly, Attack Blessing is unique because it increases damage dealt by 30% when attacking. So this actually does stack with the Miracle as well, because this buff increases damage dealt, but this effect only applies when attacking. So it's a unique buff that is different from Miracle's increase of 15% damage dealt in general. So this is why Tieris is actually so good, because her buffs stack with Chivalry, her buffs stack with the faction buff. They're all considered unique buffs. Now, there's also a few. It's interesting to note as well that there are a few pieces of equipment that apply, let's say, for example, Horror Helm applies a defense decrease of 20%. Okay? This does not stack with, let's say, Bernhard's Hegemony skill. So, her Bernhard's Hegemony, it decreases enemy defense by 20% as well. So, these two do not stack. So, while Horror Helm is useful in general, it's important to note, like, let's say against the dragon, you can't expect 20% decrease from Hegemony and then another 20% decrease from the Horror Helm. What other things are there? Aha, Lana. Lana would be a perfect example because I used her against the Ice Dragon recently. So Warlock's Hood, I have my Lana equipped with Warlock's Hood. It has a 50% chance to decrease magic defense by 30%. Okay? This effect, again, does not stack with her magic defense Intimidate, which decreases the magic defense of enemies by 20%. However, it's important to note that this magic defense Intimidate is a guaranteed thing. So as long as she's within 3 tiles of an enemy, they will always get 20% magic defense decreased. Whereas the Warlock's Hood only has a 50% chance of triggering. So it's actually a good thing to have both of them, if possible, for Lana. Because Magic Defense Intimidate is always guaranteed, whereas the Warlock's Hood, if it activates, it decreases the defense by 30%. So it decreases it by more. It just only has a chance of activating, unlike the other one, which is guaranteed. So we've talked about all these, buffs and debuffs and how they all stack and so on. So I'm going to quickly go into a game and just show how you can stack a lot of buffs on Leon. And I'm going to actually do it on a chapter mission, because chapter missions don't use up stamina. So I can just do this example and then retreat after that, because I'm not actually going to play this chapter mission out. So, with all that said, let's just quickly begin. Just waiting for it to load. Let's just skip the chatter. And yeah, I'm just going to demonstrate, as I said, I'm just going to demonstrate. I'm not going to play this out. And after the demonstration, I'm going to end this video. So, alright. Leon, faction buff. We have Tiaris for her buffs. Is there anyone else who can provide buffs? Nope. So I'm just going to leave it as these characters then. Actually, I may play this out after, but we'll see. Anyways, let's continue. So, I'm just going to show an example of what I just said. I'm going to actually begin with a faction buff from Bernhard. Alright? Now, I'm going to use Chivalry. So he currently has, right, plus magic defense, plus attack. He also has the Tree of Life boost from Tiaris. And that's actually also considered a unique boost. That's quick to note, I should note, because it boosts both defense and magic defense. So it's a unique boost that does stack. This is one of those rare ones that does. Okay, so let's continue. So Leon currently has these buffs. Let's activate Chivalry on him. Okay. First, it's important to note that Chivalry is considered turn. So you can see all the remaining buffs from the faction buff have reduced from 4 turns to 3 turns. Okay. The second thing to note is the attack int buff is gone. The one from the faction buff is gone. It's been replaced by the Chivalry one. Now, the other parts of the faction buff did remain, because they are still unique, right? This is the only plus defense buff, this is the only plus magic defense buff. And then the faction buff bonus still remains as well. So yeah, so now you can see my Leon currently has a lot of buffs. So in some ways you can say the faction buff does kind of stack with Chivalry, but but the attack value part of it doesn't. So let's just... Now, unfortunately, my Leon can't attack, so let's just end this turn, okay? Now, let's actually bring Tiaris over and have her apply her attack blessing on Leon as well. So I'm just trying to stack as many buffs as I possibly can on Leon. Okay. I actually, this is just a quick note, I generally recommend you use Chivalry first before you use Attack Blessing, because if you Attack Blessing first and then Chivalry, the Attack Blessing portion loses a turn, so it goes down to 1 turn. So then 1 turn you attack and then it's gone. So, but if you use Chivalry first, then Attack Blessing will remain for 2 turns, which is a nice benefit. And I'm just going to continue to stack buffs. You know what, let's just Divine Guard. And also just doing whatever. So I'm just going to sleep this guy. And last but not least, I'm just going to end my turn. Okay. So I'm just stacking a bunch of different buffs, as I said, on my characters. And this last one I'm going to stack on Leon will be Miracle. Probably should have just used the game so I can put Miracle on Leon right now. But in any case, skip this chatter again. Alright. So, I'm not going to move Leon yet. I'm going to apply Miracle on everybody. So now let's take a look at Leon. Okay. So, for this one turn, he has an insane number of buffs. Okay. In fact, it's more than the screen can show. So you have the two Tiara's unique buffs. Right now, because he's within Tiara's range, he has the Tree of Life buff, which is considered unique because it's defense and magic defense. There is an attack and int buff from Chivalry. There's 4 buffs from Chivalry here. 2 buffs from the attack blessing, 2 buffs from the Miracle. The Tiara's talent gave this buff. Tree of Life has this buff. And then the way above, which you can no longer see, is the 3 faction buffs from Bernhardt. So plus defense, plus magic defense, and Bernhardt's unique effect. So this is really almost the maximum amount of buffs you can stack on a character, at least to my knowledge. So yeah, I guess that pretty much covers it for this video, how you can stack as many buffs as possible. It's important to note though that after this turn, I'm going to lose a lot of these buffs. Like all the Chivalry buffs will be gone. So 4 of these are gone, and I now have no way to apply an attack increasing buff on Leon. Because Bernhardt, right, he used his faction buff at the start. So now Leon is going to go around without plus 20% or plus 30% attack for the next 3 turns. So yes, it's important to, as a result, it's important to stagger out Chivalry and faction buff for Leon. Because otherwise there will be multiple turns where he has no additional attack value. So the final point that I'm going to bring up is this. The way to do that, with Leon, what you normally do is you Chivalry up, you attack, you retreat. Liana then uses a gain. So Leon gets a second turn to attack. So he attacks again, and then his Chivalry buff is gone. And at that point, that's when Bernhardt does his faction buff. So that way, Bernhardt would benefit from 4 turns of a faction buff, and Leon would benefit from 4 turns of the faction buff as well, while his Chivalry is on cooldown. So I hope you found this video useful. I'm going to end this video here, and if you have any comments or questions, you can leave it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching everyone. Nitro out.